Good too. Okay. We're going to be learning the Maamar. We learned this Maamar. More that we've learned this Maamar before. It's a Maamar on Bahaloscha. And let's bring up the text. Okay. So this is a very powerful idea about Moshe Rabbeinu's understanding of the Jewish people's relationship with Hashem and Moshe. Okay, so the basis of the Maamar is on the verse, opening verse of the parsha, which is Bahalois Chasanerois. So God's telling Moshe to tell Aaron that when he lights the candles, Upirish Rashi explains, why do we talk about the candles at this point of the Torah? So Rashi explains, Kishara Aaron Chanukas Anasiyim, when Aaron saw how the end of last week's parsha, the princes dedicated the tabernacle, the Mishkan. And Chol Shadaita, so he felt, so to say, weakened. He felt a little uncomfortable. He didn't have any participation in dedicating the tabernacle, and for him or his tribe, etc. So God told Aaron, Chayecha, so to say, I promise you, Shalcha Gadol Mishlehem, the uniqueness of what you're going to have, which is the lighting of the menorah, that's greater than the sacrifices of the Nesiim, of the princes. Why? Because what you have is something greater, which is lighting the menorah. So to say, seemingly to appease Aaron, Hashem tells Aaron that although you didn't participate, or your tribe, meaning the tribe of Levi, did not participate in the dedication of the tabernacle, nevertheless, what you have is greater because you have the lighting of the menorah. To understand this, and also to understand what we're going to learn later in this week's parsha. When the Jewish people request that or complain for food, for man, for meat, etc. So Moshe tells to God, when God says he's going to bring them, so to say, he's going to bring them food from heaven. So Moshe says, why are they complaining? Let them slaughter their own sheep. They had sheep. So the Rebbe says, or you can say it's in a question. Am I going to slaughter their sheep for them? So Matmiya, what was the whole problem here that Moshe Rabbeinu was concerned that he didn't have enough meat for them, that he has to bring all the meat. They asked for meat. There's 600,000 people. They want meat. So Moshe is responsible for that. So the question is, Matmiya, what was Moshe so concerned about? There's 70 nations, millions of people, i.e. And there are tens of thousands of more people than the 600,000 Jews. And there's no shortage of meat, at least not in those days. So if there's no shortage of meat, what's Moshe so concerned that where's he going to get meat to feed the Jewish people? 600,000 people, which is a beautiful amount of people, doesn't come to the world, and the world has plenty of people, plenty of food. And also, what Moshe adds, if I would give them all the fish, why is he talking about fish? They asked for meat, they didn't ask for fish, so why is Moshe requesting fish? Seemingly, what the Rebbe is concerned is, what was Moshe's concern over here? What was Moshe concerned about? That he says that there's not enough meat, or what about the fish? He didn't ask about fish. There's no shortage of meat. What was he concerned about when the Jewish people asked for food and God said he should provide it for them? So this whole conversation we'll understand, it's obviously not a physical conversation about physical meat. Moshe was disappointed about something else. In this Maamar, we learn about a deep idea, a deep conversation of a conversation between God and leadership, so to say, Moshe. So Vayinin Yuvim Behagdim will understand this. By Ma'aseh Kabbanis shall Nasim, to understand what is it that Aaron, so to say, was feeling uneasy about, that he wasn't part of the karbanis, part of the sacrifices that the princes did to dedicate the Mishkan. Shekol Nasi Helish Shiftai De Karbane. So the idea seemingly was that why did the princes do these sacrifices, not just as an expression of donating something to the Mishkan. It was actually effective for the tribe. Although they sponsored the donation themselves, but by them sacrificing the sacrifice, it elevated their tribe. And to understand all this, what was Moshe's concerned about the lack of meat, and what was his mentioning of fish, and what's the idea of that the princes elevate their tribes by the sacrifices? So to understand this, we'll first delve into the idea that our rabbis have taught us that says Am ha'aretz asur lechel basar. It's brought down. There's an idea in the Talmud that says a person who's a simpleton, who's not learned enough, and what's called Am ha'aretz, a person of the land, is prohibited from eating meat. Not that it's a prohibition in the Torah, but it's not something a person who doesn't know how to learn Torah, doesn't know how to. We'll see what that means in a second. Shouldn't be eating meat. Dahainu, what's the reason behind it? Because his or her lack of Torah study doesn't have the ability and doesn't have the knowledge to elevate the meat. And it's brought down in other Maamarim, that not only doesn't the simpleton have the ability to bring up the meat, but the simpleton also will be brought down by the meat. I'll explain what that means. Moving from this understood. So if we're saying that the reason why a simpleton should not eat meat because he or she doesn't have the ability to elevate the meat, means to say that when we eat, we elevate the food. What does it mean that a person elevates food? Seemingly, the ability the person has, so to say the medaber, the one who talks, has to elevate the meat or elevate the food, is because he or she is higher than the other three elements, meaning lifeless or growth, means vegetation, or even life, the meat, let's say food. So because you're higher, you have the ability to live. If you're higher than something, you could pull something up even to your stature. It's elevating it from where it was before. But in other times, from other ideas, we find the opposite, that food is higher than the person. The Amar is all because our rabbis have taught us in the Talmud of Brachos, the tree that first man ate from, that was called the tree of knowledge, that added knowledge to Adam and Eve, chita haisa, was wheat. Meaning to say, we talked about this in the Maamar of Pesach, that in order for a person to be able to have das, knowledge of what it means, a father or mother, means greater understanding and comprehension of things around them, which is what das is, hakara, recognition, is you have to eat chita, you have to eat wheat. So we see the wheat elevates the person to a higher level of consciousness and understanding. So which one is it? Is the person higher than the food, or the food higher than the person? We've asked this question many times. The hare. So from here we see from another angle, that where does the person get the das from? It means the tree of knowledge wasn't that there was hidden knowledge in the wheat but in a camouflage. It has nothing to do with the wheat. The reason why the tree of knowledge gave knowledge is because it was specifically wheat, and wheat gives knowledge to a person. We find Rebbe Nachman talks about not specifically wheat, but in general food, that he says about his ideas that he was able to elaborate in the base madrash, in the study hall. He said, if I would have eaten a good steak, bisra means a piece of meat, the Torah of a shor of an ox, meaning a good piece of meat, I would have a better idea.
Nowadays the wheat has lot more gluten in it, and a lot of us cannot tolerate that, so we can't eat it.
I understand, but generally wheat is considered, the Birchas Hamazon is only on grains. Yeah, wheat is considered an elevated food. I understand that today there's challenges with gluten, etc. One could try
to. The wheat is not the same as it was way back then. It's many times more gluten in today's.
Possibly. But either way, we see clearly that the food elevates the person to a greater level of understanding, knowledge. Like Rebbe Nachman said, had I eaten a piece of meat, I'd have better understanding of the subject. So in one way, we find that the person elevates the meat, so much so that it says in Amar, it's a person who doesn't utilize their qualities of being a human being, and therefore remains an Amaretz, tied down to the earth, shouldn't eat meat because you don't have the ability to elevate the meat. And in other places it says the meat will bring you down. And here, so which one is it? Is the person higher than the food, or the food higher than the person?
It definitely brings you down if you get an asthma attack or other symptoms from eating it,
etc. Yeah, but we're talking about also bring a person down into more gashmias. So the idea is just both of them are true. Both ideas are true. Both the food is higher than the person is higher than the food. Why? The food is both lower than the person and also higher than the person. V'hainu, what does that mean? Kikol ha'ta'amim shakol mini tzimachim u'peiros. All the different tastes of the vegetations, of the vegetables and fruits. V'chein ha'basar, the different types of meats. Shachayis u'behemoths, from different beasts and animals. Sharshim hu me'olam ha'tayu. It means to say the very fact that there's different tastes of different foods is they come from the world of chaos, which is called the world of tayu. Shehu b'chinas olam hanikudim. Now here what he's saying in other words is how is it? Good evening, Reb Shimon. How is it? Good evening, Reb Shimon. How is it? Why is it that foods taste differently? Some foods taste like this, fruits taste like this. There's different looks in foods. We talked about the animals are different in character and in look, is because they come from the world of Torah. And the world of Torah is what's called Olam HaNekudim, the world of points. I mean, each character is separate from the other character. There's no coexistence of the midos. So if an animal comes from a certain midah, it can have that character and only that character. Like the Alter Rebbe says, you don't find in the animal kingdom that animals will go out of character. They're not flexible. They don't have coexistence of midos, and therefore, so for the tastes and different flavors in foods also come from the world of chaos, which is very separate. So an orange tastes different than an apple. And the world of Nikudim, the world of Tohu, in its spiritual elevation is much higher than our world, which is called the world of Atzilus, which is the world of pattern. Brudim is like patterns. So what is the idea of brudim? Like we call it, say, pixels, right? If you have a lot of dots, they're still dots, but they complement each other and they could create a partsuf, what's called the image. So by having all different flavors or different ideas together, you could have a single image. That ability is only in the world of Atzilus, but one of the rules of that is that the lights are dim. The dots are dim and they work together, they coexist together. So in one way, the world of Toyo, of chaos, is greater because it has a very strong personality of each mid of each attribute. But the complication of that is, or the issue of that is that they don't coexist. So therefore, what happens is in one way, the food is higher than the person because it comes from a higher world. But its inability to coexist doesn't allow it to function properly in our world. And in order for things to function properly, they have to coexist. And that's in our world, we bring things together. What does it mean that the animal kingdom comes from a higher place, comes in the world of chaos, the world of Nikudim? Again, the word Nikudim, the word Nakud that's the dot. Separate, one is separate from another. Brudim is a pattern. The patterns go together. So he says, what is the world of the animal kingdom come from a higher place? The root of all animal is Michais Hamarkava, come from the animals that were on the chariot. Like the Pnei Ari, the image of the lion, who Makir Nafshis Achais, and that represents not just the lion, but all the beasts. Pnei Shar and the sun and the image of the ox, who Makir Nafshis Abhemus is the source of all the animals. Upnei Nesher and the image of the eagle is Makir Nafshis Oifis. That's the souls of the bird kingdom. V'hinei hachais noisis is akise. So this is one of the idea. What do we find? That the animals, like in a chariot, right? The animals are carrying the chair. So the chair is dependent on the animals to carry it. V'alakise kemari adam, what was on the chair that was being carried by the animals, is the image of man, which represents the world of Atzilus, our world, which is the world of brudim, of patterns. Who begins eser spheres, and what is Adam? Adam, hey Danny, is the makeup of all the 10 attributes together, which is the eser spheres of Atzilus, the olam hatikkun, the world of fixing. Sheniskenu b'bchinas parts of Adam, that because of the patterns, it could give an image, like we explained many times. Pixels give an image. So if you're going to if the pixels are not going to be able to be in a pattern that could give an image, you're just going to see a lot of lights. V'hainu adech mashal say devadragas hishtalshus evaria adam shurmach evarim v'shagidim. As a person works within their body, the 240 limbs and the 365 arteries. Ukitzir aguf kumay kemisabeshes and nefesh. And just like the physical form of the body, so too the soul matches the physical form of the body. Shari slapshus ha'oris hanefesh baguf umischal lefitzir aguf. The body, the soul it divides according to the body. So the power to speak is in the mouth, the power to do is in the hands, the power to walk is in the feet, etc. For instance, in the brain is the thoughts. Ubepeh hadibur, in the mouth is the power to speak. Ubiyadam koach hamais, in the hands is the power to do. And that's why the person is called Adam. So there's different explanations why is a person called Adam. Adam is made up of the three Hebrew words Aleph, Daled, Mem. Aleph represents the thought. Daled is Dibur, speech, and Mem is Maisa, the different functionalities of a person. A person could think, speak, and do. Ukmoikein, Ulamaila. That's the sphere of Atzilus. So too in the world of Atzilus. There is the world of structure, where the midos coexist together. They balance off each other. And the lights that go into the vessels, so to say, of the midah is like the soul goes into the body. It fits. It's not a light that doesn't belong in that vessel. Meaning to say, the conversation of lights and vessels is a long conversation, but to put it in short is that the vessels are the definition of the midah, of the character. And the light seemingly is more simple, like just an energy for that specific character of the vessel. But at the same time, the Rebbe says, it's not just an abundance of light or a light that doesn't fit. It has to be a light that actually could function in that vessel. So chesed should come out chesed. So when God manifests in the attributes of chesed, gevurah, tiferes, kindness, severity, or limitations, beauty, etc., these are all different ways of functionality that we have. A person was made in the image of God, so we're also built up of the 10 characters, of the 10 spheros. Is that the lights of the soul function within the vessels of the body, or the vessels of the soul, meaning the character of the soul. So v'yesh bechinas moich in the kadnus, moich in the godless. And as things are in the body, this is the way things are. You have greater understanding, lower understanding. How much light comes in, how much it fits in, and how much it filters through. That's only by people that there's this balance, and there's different levels. By other creations, for instance, behemoths v'chayas, the animals and the beasts. You see, the beasts don't look at all like a human. And one of the reasons why in the animal kingdom you don't find that the head usually is higher than the rest of the body is because there is no difference between moach and leiv. The midos, they don't have that separation of on the level of difference of intellect. We're not going to get into the conversation of the level of intellect in animals. We know there's many discussions about what level of intellect the animals have, but it's not in the same way of understanding and functionality as a human has. So it's not just that the soul comes down in a different way in the animals. Its whole root is different. The root is from the world of chaos. It doesn't come from the structure. So what we're building at is what does it mean that a human elevates the food and gets elevated by the food? Because from a certain perspective, the animal kingdom is much greater than the human kingdom. By the other side, for the ability to accomplish certain things or the structure of things, that has to happen through the humans. So that's how the humans elevate the food, and the food elevates the person. So it's a joint effort. Like we've learned many times. Alter Rebbe talks about sus v'roichvoi, the rider and the horse. They need each other. The horse needs the rider to direct the horse, and the rider needs the horse to move fast. Each one is contributing in order to accomplish something. So too we find that in the nefesh of Likkutei nefesh Bahamas, the godly soul and the animal soul. Because within the person, even within the structure, the element of the animal is the animal soul. And that goes higher and higher and more separate. So the animal soul, its origin is from the animal kingdom, which its origin is from the animals on the chariot. So this is the struggle. This is what's known as Seder Hishtalshlus, the chain of creation. And within the chain of creation, there's more structure and less structure. But the point is that we need both of them. We need the out of structure, meaning to say the animals that has that chayas, that uncontrolled passion. Because if it was just left to the human kingdom, we'd be very limited and possibly unaccomplishing. We need that energy that's not controlled. But our job is to control that energy and utilize it together to be able to accomplish things. Okay, that's the idea in short. V'hinei. When we talk about the animals, we say, like I said before, the power of the animal is that it can carry the chair. You need the animal, that strength, and not just the physical strength, but the excitement strength, the passion, The idea of the nikudim, of the dots, is that it's a very, very strong excitement, a very strong feeling, awareness of its energy. So like I said before, just like a person rides the animal lifts the person and takes the person where the person needs to go. So to the animals, that energy carries the structure that's represented as the Olam Atzilas, the world of structure, of tikkun, of fixing. Higher than it could go on its own. It lifts and elevates the person to be able to go into that huge energy of the world of chaos. But the idea is, if it has to, the person has to, at the same time, that's the tension. The tension is not to become chaotic, but to find control in the chaos. The Rebbe at the end, the Rebbe in the final years, the Rebbe were talking about that it has to be that our generation has to have what's called oires de teu, b'kelim de tikkun. We have to have the lights of the world of teu, which are tremendous lights, because the lights in the world of teu, of chaos, are even greater than the lights in the world of fixing. The lights themselves are in abundance. And at the same time, we have to have the power of the kelim of tikkun, the vessels of the world of fixing. So tremendous lights with tremendous control and discipline. They also get carried with the chair. They carry the chair, but they get carried themselves. They get elevated and they get lifted up with the person. Because when the person gets elevated, because the person is fundamentally structural and disciplined, so now that energy becomes disciplined. And it's able to elevate them. And that's the idea of the food. It means food on its own has much more power than the person. But food on its own is an uncontrolled energy. When food is given to the person, so that's an elevation for the food. Now that food becomes part of a purpose. Hopefully that the person uses that energy for positive things, for godly things, for holy things, for dir b'tachtonim. And that gives purpose to the food. When a person eats the food, the meat, when the person eats it and gets energy from it and acts on that energy, now the food becomes to the level of speech of a person. So this, that it gives it energy, that's the power of the animal. But the fact that the person now gives it discipline is the power of the person over the animal, and that's the combination of food. So that's the idea of food, and this is why he doesn't finish off. But this is why it says an am aretz shouldn't eat meat. A simpleton shouldn't eat meat. I mean to say, if you don't utilize your qualities as a human being, and you're eating meat just to stuff yourself, and you don't have the discipline of how to utilize that energy, it's better don't eat the meat, because then the meat is this powerful energy that's not for you, because you're not going to use it properly. Okay, base. V'hinei habasar hu b'chinas gvuras, of the different foods. Again, we said each food, each of the creations in the world of chaos have these tremendous energies. They're nikudais, which is not dimmed lights, very powerful lights. What is basa? What is the energy of meat? Is gvura? It's red, right? So it's the blood. That's the attribute of gvura. Shtakachu sumka. That's why meat is red. Therefore, gam achar ber v'ala hu nichlal b'gvura kedusha. So when it gets eaten by a person, that gvura severity goes into become a holy severity, but it doesn't change character. It doesn't get when it becomes part of the person, it's not giving a different kind of energy. It's the same energy of its character as a piece of meat. But now, because the person has the ability to turn it into gevurus to kedusha, holy severity. What does that mean in the person's avodas Hashem? The passion you have, the rishbeish, the burning fire you have for God and godliness, comes specifically from eating meat. Right, so we're not here to have a conversation about the vegetarian or the vegan, etc. We're just saying how Torah views it. Because, like we said before, what is the source of the animals and the beasts? Is from the lion and the ox on the chariot. Lion and the ox have passion for Hashem. In general, those are the gevuras. Although the lion is chesed and the shar is gevura. But in general, they are this energy of the animal. Like it says, Boyaras Kemari Halapidim, There is boyar, is the brightness of the lapidim of the energy of the animals, hasrafim, the burning angels, lashon rishbiesh. These are all expressions of passion of fire. Therefore, the character of the animal is passionate. Its meat is red because it all represents gvura. This is where he goes back to what he says. This is why the rabbis say, the simple person should not eat meat. Why? If you don't have the tools. And I don't want to discuss now if the Am Aretz is an Am Aretz by choice, or an Am Aretz because he or she doesn't have the ability to study. If you're saying a person is Am Aretz because God, let's say, didn't bless them with the great knowledge, means they should not participate in meat. I'm not sure exactly how you want to understand it. But if we're going to talk about at least the person who doesn't apply themselves, right? So he says, therefore, you're not going to apply yourselves, your qualities of sechel, of moach, of intellect. So therefore, you don't have the tools. And you have all this energies, but you don't know how to fix it, to transform it. And the reason why the rabbis say, they don't say don't eat food. All the foods have energies. Like we said, you have wheat, give das, and the vegetables give energy, and the fish and the birds give energy. But of all the energies, the energy of the meat is this aish, is fire. Fire, if it's not directed, it burns, it could consume. If it's consuming the wrong things, that's not good. And he says of all the foods, because it's gevura, it has more of it leans towards, and there's a vulnerability to chitzanius, to negativity, anger, jealousy. These all come from meats. So these are certain levels of ego. So there's therefore, if you don't know how to control that energy, and it's going to make you more angry, and it's going to make you more jealous, or more other things, or more indulging, etc. So then you're not controlling that energy, and that energy is consuming you. Vikivon, and he says, and because, just turn to the next page. So you don't have the ability to elevate the foods. The foods didn't bring you down. Aval Talmud Chacham, the Torah scholar, meaning that they use their intellect for Torah, and they have the tools to direct that energy positively. They use the Chachma to be mevarer, to elevate, separate the negative from the positive. And then on the contrary, the food is a source of passion for Hashem. Okay, so now we understand what the food is. Now we're going back to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was disappointed in the Jewish people. He says, why are they asking me for meat? Here we have this little section of the Maamar, and then we go into the answer of Hashem. But now we're going to go into the question of Moshe. So the Jewish people come to Moshe Rabbeinu in the desert, and they complain, they want meat. And Moshe is disappointed. He says, where do I have meat from? Where am I supposed to give the meat from? What am I, a butcher? I'm not. So seemingly the conversation is very simple. Moshe says, where do I have meat? And God says, don't limit God. But here the Alter Rebbe doesn't explain that Moshe is questioning the choice of the Jewish people in wanting meat and in their avodas Hashem. So that's typical. Typical is that the meat it fuels the aish, the fire to the Talmud Chacham, to the Torah scholar. It seems all good. But Moshe wanted more from the Jewish people. Moshe, our teacher says, where do I have meat from? Pirish. Never, even though what we described is this great energy that comes from where it's rooted as the animals on their chariot, for Moshe Rabbeinu, that's a low level. Moshe Rabbeinu is much higher than the energy that is the source that comes through eating meat. Moshe Rabbeinu is a much elevated level than that. So Moshe appears because at the end of the day, it's still a physical food that's tied down, like we learned in the Maamar of Shmini about the Nune Yoima versus the Shar Habar. The Shar Habar is the passionate tzaddik, but it's not the level of the quiet fish or the cold fish. Moshe Rabbeinu is much higher than this energy of even the holy energy from the meat. Even after they get elevated, and he explains why. Because at the end of the day, the passion and this excitement that is created by eating meat, that fire, which is ahava, that's love for God. What does it fuel? It fuels an elevated level of self. Yesh mi she'oyev, I love God. At the end of the day, there's still you. And it makes so a person who's not elevated loves the world and loves their life and loves money and loves other things. And the elevated person loves God. But fundamentally, there's still a connection. It's about you. What do you love? So now you love something spiritual. So I'm a yesh, I'm something. I'm not nullifying myself to God. I, as I exist, love God. It's called yesh mishayev, someone who loves God. But Moshe Rabbeinu is much higher than that. Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't have self. He doesn't look at himself as something. He says to the Jewish people, what are we? Ma means what? Bittul. Does it, at the end of the day is a person who's a creation as when you identify and when you're connected to self, it's separate from God. I'm something and God's something, and I love God as a separate entity. Moshe Rabbeinu says, I'm nothing. I'm totally consumed by God. I don't recognize myself as something. Shu bechinas ein tachsa bittul, total self-nullification. Doesn't mean Moshe is cold and doesn't have passion and excitement. It's never about my feelings of love for God. It's an expression of his nothingness. And again, where does this express itself in action? And it's different. There's choices that we can make in life that al pi Torah, according to Torah, you're right to make these choices. But that's a choice of a yesh mishayev. There's certain choices The people came and complained to Moshe. Moshe says to God, give them meat. Moshe says, ma'ayin li basar. Why am I giving them meat? We're supposed to be ayin. We're supposed to be nothingness. In ayin and basar don't go together. Why am I giving them meat? Meat again feeds the passion of the yesh, of the person who wants to feel God. Moshe thought he elevated his people to nothingness. The meat represents gevura, represents yesh. It represents something. I love God. I want to see God from a perspective. I want to take in godliness. I don't want to nullify myself from godliness, where I don't exist anymore. And Moshe didn't understand why is he required to feed that to them? Why isn't he elevating them? Why haven't they been elevated? Why are we still talking about it? Because the root of all negative comes from that. Where does the golden calf come from? The golden calf is a byproduct of the yesh mishayev. Because as soon as the yesh mishayev, the person, if you don't have bittul, so yes, the person who loves God and elevated the meat and is I'm standing there loving God, but at the end of the day, because there's the I in the conversation, as soon as the I is not being fed enough, or is not being inspired enough, or has an issue, the agenda is being affected, from that trickles down to having a golden calf. It's not a guaranteed thing. But where's the source of it? The source of it is the word yesh. Now it's yesh mishayev, I love God. But from that same yesh mishayev could trickle down that there's a golden calf. He doesn't feel he should find that for them. Here's the brilliant answer Hashem gives Moshe Rabbeinu. Because Moshe has a Tana Tzedekah. Moshe has a right. Moshe's the man. When Moshe is troubled by and concerned with is seemingly justified. And here's what God teaches Moshe something. Moshe, so God responds to Moshe. Hayad Hashem Tikter. Why are you limiting God? Why do you expect perfection? Why do you expect that you need perfection to find godliness? You only want that. You think that the only way of a person could serve Hashem, yes, bittul is the highest level. Yesh mishayev could be the source of the golden calf, but you have to see it from the perspective of the bigger picture. Don't limit to where God can be found. Just because a person is found in the situation of a yesh, they can't nullify themselves. Doesn't mean they can't have a godly experience. That's what God tells Moshe. But Moshe, God responds to Moshe, Yad Hashem Tikser, why are you limiting God? The word tikser means from the word katsar, small. Why are you making God's head small? Pirish. You're right. You are greater than the yesh, the person who loves God. And you are ma, you're nothing. And you expect that from your people as well. The basar, kiata b'chinas ma bittul. Moshe represents self-nullification, nothingness. And it means, again, like the Alter Rebbe says, not that you don't love God. You don't love God as a self-expression. Because the self-expression is loving God, and tomorrow you love something else. Why are you limiting God? Bitmia is a question mark. If you tried hard enough, you could penetrate the chachma, this bittul, even within the avoda of a yesh, of a person who feels self. To bring the chachma down, you don't need to elevate and totally disconnect yourself from all worldly feelings and expression to find God. But in the yesh of the basar itself, you could find the chachma, the bittul. That's why the Alter Rebbe is going to explain. This goes back to the adlokas hasaneris, the lighting of the candles. That's why the Alter Rebbe is going to explain the meat was fatty, was oily. Because the idea is that to bring the chachma in the meat means don't limit. Moshe Rabbeinu was looking at it too extreme. If it's selfish, if it's self-involved, so it's selfish. It's yesh. Why am I? I have nothing to deal with here. He says you do have what to deal with. In the yesh itself, you could penetrate the chachma, the bittul. He says even within the yeshes, the self-awareness of the person that connects to the eating of the meat. Even within there, while the person feels self, they could have also a combination of bittul. You don't limit to how far God could go down. God's hand. That's why God says to Moshe, Yad Hashem Tikser. Why are you limiting me? Do you think I could only be found in the person who sacrifices self in order to have a relationship with me in a complete way? It wasn't that Moshe didn't understand that there's godliness to be found in yesh, but he wanted higher. And God says godliness could come even lower. In the yesh, you could have bittul, self-nullification. A person could be in touch with a need for physical. This comes down to the Rebbe's whole beautiful talk in Rosh Hashanah, why the Shemona Esrei, when we stand in the Amida, we talk about physical needs. We talk about Rafa'enu, give us healing, give us a parnasa, Baruch Aleinu. Right? We're standing in front of God, the Amida, the highest point of the davening. And what are we talking about? Physical needs. Rosh Hashanah, we talk about physical needs. Why? It's the same answer, Yad Hashem Tiktzar. It's not a contradiction to have physical needs. And those needs to have, and there's yeshus, and you need them, whether it's gashmias or ruchnias, spiritual needs or physical needs, and within that needs simultaneously. The chachma, the bittul, could be in the yesh itself. That's the chiddush what God says. That in yesh you could have bittul. When you're simultaneously feeling your own physical needs in that need itself, you could have a bittul. And what does that mean in avodah? That you don't separate your need from the need from dir b'tachtonim. A beautiful house and a beautiful life doesn't have to be separate from God. You could turn that as a vessel, as a sanctuary to Hashem. Your motivation behind the beautiful things in this world, and the menucha and the calmness in this world, and the ashiris and the wealth of this world is for a way to make it an ashiris for godliness, for Hashem. V'zeh inyan haslav, and that's why the food that Moshe brought down, the meat that we brought down in this week's parsha, they're very fatty, oily meats. It's brought down. Kedisa b'Gemara Yuma. The Gemara in Yuma tells us, Maskinin la atlase rifte. They put it on 13 pieces of bread, right? And the oil soaked through all 13 pieces. They're so oily, you couldn't just eat the bread. You had to mix it with something else because it was too oily. That's how oily the meat was, to show that the oil, which is shemen, which is chachma, which is nullification, could penetrate the yesh of the meat. It's obviously if the 13th piece of meat was like that, so obviously, the 13th piece of bread, so the first piece of bread was mshabi inedible b'chlal. Right? Today we don't celebrate fatty meats, but in the Torah does celebrate fatty meats. The shemen is the chachma. It's a level of chachma of total bittul. And in this world also, shemen means wisdom. Torah, which is chachma, which is wisdom, is called shemen, is oil. Oil represents wisdom, and wisdom is the source of bittul, because the wisdom is bottled, it's nullified to the seichel. Bina is the understanding; it's less connected to the origin. Therefore, it's from a distance. V'zeunin haslav, and that's why the meat sheshemen shehu b'chinas chachma nimshach nispashes the basar. It's the oil that saturated the meat. Shabasar haslavu b'chinas gvuras. The basar itself is red, is the gvura, but in the gvura, in the yesh, was the bittul of the chachma. V'shemen shebahu b'chinas chachma b'chinas ma v'ayin v'aynu shenimshach habittul gam b'chinas yesh the basar. That's the chiddush what God tells Moshe. God doesn't say to Moshe, "You're wrong." God says to Moshe, you're wrong, not because you're wrong to think that I can't penetrate the yesh, that a Jew can't find holiness and meaning simultaneously in their yeshes to find bittul. That's the chiddush. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu, that's what God taught Moshe Rabbeinu. That's why this is such an important conversation between Moshe and God, because it's such an eye opener of what Torah mitzvahs is and what's the reach and expectations of godliness within a person's avodas Hashem. That you don't have to lose yeshes to find bittul. You could combine yesh and ma together. The meat becomes oily. The meat becomes chachma. And that's why God tells to Moshe, Hayad Hashem Tikser, why are you limiting me? V'zeh Hayad Hashem Tikser. This is what God says to Moshe, why are you limiting me? Why are you limiting my hand? Because God could bring down from the level of ayin, l'toicha basar, into the meat. Although meat itself means yesh, feeling of self, nevertheless it has the hashpah, the koyach habitl, the power of self-nullification. Why? So he says, now he goes into reason why were they able to transform this meat to be a meat of bitl? It means yesh and bitl at the same time. It says, the bird that they had in the desert as the food from heaven comes from the bird on the chariot. The bird on the chariot is the source of the soul of all the bird kingdom. But regular bird meat is not so fatty. It only has, like the cow and the lion, it only has the yeshus. Slav but the Slav, the specific meat, the Aden desert, represents that you could have meat that is connected to oil. You could bring self-nullification within yeshus. The ability to combine kindness and verity together. Within the yeshes, the psar haslav and the meat of the bird, the oil comes in, and the chesed, which is connected to bittul, which is chachma, saturates the meat, and within the energy of yeshes is bittul. That's the chiddush over here. That in the energy of yeshes, of self-awareness, in the self-awareness, there's bittul, the self-nullification. Just like when Aaron lit the candles, that the oil becomes saturated, the wick becomes saturated by the oil. By this, and through that, then it gives off a light. That's a combination. The wick and the oil can give off a light. That's a balance of kindness and severity. Chesed dechacham hu Hashemet. V'or de psila hu b'chinas ha'gvuras v'islavas. Sha'psila hi b'chinas yeshem nechnas ba'or. The fire, the yeshes becomes consumed by the fire of the oil. V'u'inin halas nefesh ha'adam b'chinas ratzi v'islavas. It's to take the yeshes. See, what the Alter Rebbe is coming at over here is not just that Moshe Rabbeinu's challenge is being answered by Hashem, but don't limit me. It means you think I could only go so far, I could go further. But there's also, if God can go so further, there's also a purpose there. It means there's a kavanah there. The kavanah is that there's a mile of yeshes over bittul. The mile of yeshes over bittul is that the yeshes itself has, because you have a negeya b'davar, because it's about you, there's a certain excitement about it. It's not there's a certain excitement when you benefit, yesh misha'ayev versus the person who's nullified. The nullification, with all its greatness, because it's nullification, it's less energetic. But when a person has yeshus, there's more energetic. If you could turn that yeshus, the same energy of self-interest, at the same time be nullified to the higher purpose of God, meaning you need the money, you need the things, you need the refuah, you have issues, you have an agenda, but your agenda is in line and totally connected and totally bottom line by the fact that it's a way for me to serve Hashem. There's a purpose there. It's not just when Hashem says Ayad Hashem Tiktzar, don't limit God. It doesn't mean that I could go further down. That the further down I go, the higher the elevation is. There's a purpose there. It's, you can look at it from a way of, okay, I could reach further. I would rather not reach that far, but I could reach further. Don't limit me. The purpose is that there's a kavanah in reaching further. There's an intention there. There's an elevation. There's a benefit to reaching so further down. Not just that you're going to elevate from a person that's selfish, but in this, that selfishness has value, because there's a certain level of excitement in selfishness that if you could transform that, then you're transforming a higher level of energy in a certain way. But you need the bittul. The yeshus itself is negative, even if it's yeshus for God, selfishness, self-awareness for God. But if you could have that selfishness and then transform that to combine that with bittul, that's another whole power, and that's the idea of the candle. And this is why he's going to explain. We're not going to really get it, but he's going to explain over here. I'll just learn the beginning of it. What he's going to explain over here is why the God tells Aaron that the lighting of the menorah is greater than the sacrifices of the princes. Right? We started off the Maamar saying that Rashi quotes that when Aaron saw what the princes did for their tribes, that each prince came and dedicated in the tabernacle on behalf of their tribe, they elevated their tribe through the sacrifices. God says to Aaron, don't worry, but lighting the menorah is greater than that. And the reason is not just because the lighting the menorah is greater, right? The Nachmanides, the Ramban says, because the menorah outlasts the korbanos, the candles of the Hanukkah candles, we still light them today. But put that on the side for a second, or maybe it's combined in another way, but just from a different perspective. The idea is that the korban, that the sacrifices that the princes did on behalf of their tribes, was to elevate the yesh misha ohev. It only elevated the self. It was only about the meat. God tells Aaron, why is yours greater? Because you can elevate that the yesh should be batal. You could bring shemen, which is the oil of the menorah, that the oil of the menorah penetrates, that the yesh, the self-interest, the self-focus, should become elevated to godliness, to bittul. That's why what Aaron does, the menorah is greater than the sacrifices. Sacrifices only elevates to the level that I love God. The menorah elevates that within the eye, there's the nullification of godliness. That's what he said. That's how he finishes off. That you're able to bring the bittul into the passion of the yesh, to the person who has a passion for God. And that's the idea of the Slav. And that's it. Just finish off over here. He says, This is what God says in the beginning, the opening of this week's parsha. That what Aaron does with lighting the menorah is greater than the sacrifices of the princes at the end of last week's parsha. The carbon is that the altar eats. Just like we said before, that when a person eats meat, it creates a passion for God. When you elevate it properly, you're a Talmud Chacham. But nevertheless, it just feeds yesh, my self-interest, even if it's holiness. I love God. The altar is the same idea. It's on a higher level, but fundamentally the same idea. Yesh mishayev, someone who's eating, someone who's loving. And therefore our rabbis have taught us that the altar is like the table. And when the altar has been destroyed, a person's table is a place of atonement. This is what the princes did. Each prince elevated his tribe through their sacrifice on their day. The first day was Yehuda, the second day was Zevulun, third day was Yisachar, etc. Each prince elevated his tribe to the level of Yesh Mishayiv, like the person who eats meat, who becomes loving of God. But Aaron is much higher than that. The menorah is much greater than that. And he continues to explain, the reason is because, again, the idea is the princes represent the sacrifices, and the sacrifices represent achilas adam, like a person who eats, and the achilas hamizbeach, which is all about the yeshus, whereas Aaron HaKohen, through lighting that candles, elevates a person that the yesh should become saturated with chachma, with bittul. And that's, again, connected to Moshe Rabbeinu's conversation with God, where Moshe felt that if a person to truly elevate to their highest purpose is to totally lose self, God says to Moshe, Yad Hashem Tiktzar, don't limit me, I could bring bittul into yeshus. But that's Aaron HaKohen. Aaron and Moshe are the team that represent and elevate the Jewish people. So Aaron elevates the people to be receptacle, that in their yeshus they could have the menorah, they could have the light of the shemen. All right, everyone, Laila Tov, and thank you for joining, and we'll see you, B'ez Hashem, next week. Take care.
Thank you, Rabbi.